Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about fishing troughs, and we're going to talk about fishing very specific troughs. We'll be talking about the troughs that are formed by the rock bank that we have here on the California Delta that hopefully you can see behind me across the river here. So with that, I'm going to sit down. We're going to go over everything you need to know about fishing troughs here on the California Delta. Let's do it. All right, it's time for a little trough talk. Today we're going to talk about how troughs are formed. We'll talk about how to fish these troughs, boat positioning, bait selection, how to choose the right troughs, the troughs that are going to be most productive. We'll go over everything you need to know to catch fish when it comes to fishing these rock bank troughs. You're going to have to take into consideration three things. You're going to have to take into consideration the rock, the vegetation, the tides, and the current. So let's start with tides and current. Everybody talks about the California Delta as being a river. In actuality, we are part of an estuary. We're connected to the Pacific Ocean, so we have tidal influence. The tide comes in and out twice a day. The current from these tides are partially what helps to cut these troughs in around the bank. The next thing we're going to talk about is the vegetation. And what we have out here on the Delta is called Ageria densia. It is commonly called Brazilian pondweed. It's in the family of Elodea or Elodea, however you want to pronounce it. This is a weed or a vegetation that roots in soft bottom. It can grow out to about 15 feet of water. I'll say 12 to 15 feet of water, and it'll grow all the way up to the surface, and it will mat a lot of times on the surface. Now, this vegetation can't grow real close to the bank because we have this tidal influence, and the water goes up and down. So a lot of times at low tide, which our tides may have a 5 to 6 foot of fluctuation, that 5 or 6 feet when the tide goes up and down, nothing grows real close to the bank. At least this Elodea is not going to grow real close to the bank. And this is what you're going to kind of figure out. This is why these troughs form. So anyhow, we have this vegetation. It's growing up to the surface. Sometimes it's matted. At low tide, you'll see these mats. When the tide goes up, a lot of times you will not see the vegetation because the tide comes up and it's subsurface. So a lot of times these really productive troughs may be a little hard to find. You don't have to look for these things with electronics. It's all going to be time on the water and visually finding these areas. And I'll also say that you can identify this plant in the springtime when it starts growing. It'll have little white flowers, and you'll see the little white flowers on it. Then you're going to know this is this Ageria densia stuff. This is the stuff you want to look for, especially when it's clean and growing fresh in the spring. All right, now we're starting to put this puzzle together. We know a little bit about tides. We know about the vegetation. Let's talk about the rock. We're talking about literally two types of rock. We're going to be talking about chunk rock, which is basically rock that's been broken up by man or man-made chunk rock. And this is what we have about 90% of the time on the banks out here. The second type of rock that we have is called a urbanite. And urbanite is broken up pieces of street, sidewalk, whatever they do, to break up the cement. The difference is the chunk rock out here is generally about the size of a football. And it's the common rock that you see most of the time. The urbanite is big slabs of could be sidewalk or whatever it is, and bigger slabs. So with that in mind, one thing that I really look for is some of this older urbanite that's out there and the transitions. If you have small chunk rock and then you go to this urbanite, these transitional zones are really a good place to start looking, and it's very simple to run down the bank and visually spot these things. One other thing that I'll bring up when it comes to the chunk rock, you can have old chunk rock, you can have new chunk rock, and you can tell by the color of the rock. I do not like fishing the newer chunk rock because it has to get seasoned. When I talk about seasoning, it means it needs to have a few years for that tide to come up and down. It'll start growing moss on it. At that point, it becomes a start of a food chain. You have crayfish that come in, you have small bait fish. You could tell the old chunk bank looks kind of natural. It's always got, you know, some moss on it. It's a different color, and it'll be easy for you guys to tell the old chunk from the new chunk. Now we have the key pieces of the puzzle together. We understand rock, we understand current, we understand the vegetation. As this tide comes in and out, it kind of flushes, scours, maybe cleans in close to the bank. So this is what's forming the rock, a clean trough next to the rock, and then offshore, hopefully 5 or 6 feet, we've got this elodea or Giardensia growing, which is the submerged vegetation, and we have that clean trough between the bank and the vegetation. That's what we're looking for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some general ideas on what I look for and what I try to stay away from. We'll go over that, then I'm going to pull up, we'll go out to a trough, we'll talk about baits, and we'll talk about techniques, and I'll show you actually how to fish these troughs, or at least my ideas when it comes to fishing the troughs. Number one, I don't like fishing troughs on the main channel. There's just too much traffic and I don't dig it. I also will stay away from small feeder sloughs. These smaller sloughs have fish in them, but they're generally shallow and they get weeded up, so they don't get real nice troughs. So I'm sticking to troughs that are mid-sized troughs that get some current fluctuation, because remember, the current fluctuation helps to clean these troughs out and keep them clean so we can put baits in them. I also don't like fishing new chunk rock. Remember to look for that older chunk rock, the stuff that has moss on it, so on and so forth. I also like fishing banks that have a little bit of bend in them. The more snaking in a slough, the more you're going to find that the currents hit these banks different ways. Sometimes the trough is going to be really nice on the point. Sometimes as you go around the point and there's a trough or there's a horseshoe or a bend in the bank, maybe the current hits that bank just perfectly, and as it hits in that horseshoe, it helps to scour that part of the bank out. So those are some of the things that I like to look at. I also like to look at the angle of each bank, how steep it is, how that rock is coming down into the water. A real steep bank is going to produce a deeper trough, but it's going to be not as wide. A bank that's coming down into the water and it's not quite as steep, maybe it's like this, it's going to produce a shallower trough, but it's going to be much wider. You don't need fancy electronics to find these troughs. You're going to find these by just plain and simple time on the water. You're going to need to be out there looking. It's all visual. As you go from place to place, you're going to be looking at banks. You're going to be looking for old chunk rock. You're going to be looking for the big pieces of sidewalk. You look for those transitions. You'll look for matted vegetation. You're going to have to stop and you're going to have to go investigate. You don't need fancy electronics, but you do need to take the time to go over there and visually look at these things. And we're looking for the cleanest troughs that have at least 2 to maybe 4 or 5 foot of depth. And I really like the wider troughs. As we get into fishing, you'll see, you know, the bigger the trough, the easier it's going to be to fish. So with that, let's pull up. I'll pull out a couple of rods and we'll talk about the specific baits, techniques, and boat positioning, and we'll go from there. Let's check it out. So I didn't go very far. Where we were filming the first half of this video, I just went across. I'm not saying that this is a great trough or a great bank to fish. I just want to explain how to fish these things. And obviously, if you find chunk rock and you find a tree that has some shade on it, you definitely want to fish that. Not what we're talking about today, but that is a bonus. As I come around here, you'll see a clump of tules on a rock bank. Those tules can be absolutely a prime spot to fish, and that would be something that I'm going to take a quick cast there, right in there. That's where I'd want to fish that. Let's go right around in there. And you definitely want to fish right around these tules. And I'm going to pull this camera down and I'm going to kind of show you what you might not be able to see on this bank. We have the rock coming down into the bank, and I could see the rock from here. It's probably 2-3 feet deep, and out about 6 or 8 feet from the rock, the vegetation starts. So there is a trough on this bank. So let's take a look right down here. Hopefully you guys can see this trough that's forming right in here. It's about 6 feet offshore. It goes down to about 3 or 4 feet. We've got vegetation right here, and there is a trough. The fish will hold right along the inside seam of that trough. Right, so when we have a trough like we have now, I like to position the boat very close to the bank and cast parallel with the bank. Get it way up in front on the inside of this trough, and then try to slowly bring my bait back down through the trough. I've got something I want to show you here, and here's a big piece of this urbanite. Let's pull this camera off. Hopefully you can see that. See that big piece of chunk down there? That big piece of chunk? That was put there long ago, and that is prime territory. I will try to mark this area because I want to fish this type of stuff. And you can see there is a transition from a couple of those big pieces of rock back down into here, and it goes to this chunk rock right over here. All right, I'm jumping around there a little bit more than I should, but when I see this, I want to point it out to you what I'm looking for. So in this situation, and in most situations, pulling into the bank at high tide and getting on the inside of the trough is where you want to be. Also, you have to be aware that you don't want to bang up your boat or anything. My best friend in this situation, when I am fishing a trough at high tide, is making a long cast with a weightless T-rigged Cinco. It's weedless. You can get it in that trough, you can pull it through the weeds, and it is a good bait year round. I also like to take topwater poppers, throw them right next to the bank, maybe even a walking bait. If you have a good trough, you can use a crankbait. You probably want to use the crankbaits that go down from 1 to 3 foot in depth. The next thing that you would want to use is maybe a chatterbait. If you are an accomplished punch flip guy where you can take your bait and put it in to holes, that can be very productive. But if you are not an accurate caster, I would probably leave the flipping and punching alone until you get a little more confidence in that particular technique. Those are the baits that you would want to use when you are in tight, high tide, your boat is close on the inside of the vegetation, and you are fishing parallel with the bank. Now up here, we've got some matted stuff. You can't really fish that. The only thing that you really can do is if there's a trough underneath that, you can throw a frog over that. When I was talking about being able to punch these places, a little mat like this, if you can punch it right in that mat, maybe with a jig or a punch style bait, you can drop it right in there, twitch it around, pull it out, and go to the next hole. So when we have this situation and the tide goes down and maybe we have a mat that's coming up right here, I'm going to make a little cast out there. We'll go over here and hopefully you guys can see this mat. This is starting to mat up right here, and you could see this little trough in here. A lot of times this mat will run all the way down the bank, and this is the only trough that you're going to have. It's 2 to 3, 4 feet of feet, 2, 3, 4 feet. You cannot pull the boat inside there. This is how you're going to fish that. So hopefully, as you look over my shoulder, I'm going to cast this worm right into the vegetation, which is right about there. Now let's just pretend that that mat is running all the way down the bank, and we only have 3 to 5 feet to get in that trough. In this situation, instead of pulling the boat into the trough, I'm going to go from the outside, stay off the bank a little bit. It's going to require a limited bait selection. Obviously, you can throw a hollow body frog out there, or this weightless, weedless T-rig Cinco. You can throw it right up to the bank and then just pull it right into the vegetation. One of the things that I always remember Rob Cloutier from the Bass Hole saying that is, in these types of troughs, the fish will hold in the vegetation looking at the bank, and they're looking at that bank just like it was a TV. They know everything that drops in that bank. So when you throw a worm in there and they see it drop down there, they know it's there. As you pull it into that trough, most of the time as it gets closer to the trough and that fish is sitting there looking at the bank like it's a TV or a buffet, as that worm or whatever it is gets closer, that's when they're going to hit it. Now, the troughs that are narrow are much more difficult to fish, and you have a limited bait selection, so just keep that in mind. Hopefully we've gone over enough information that's going to give you guys a good foundation of coming out, starting to look for these troughs and fish them. Boat positioning is key. Knowing the exact banks that have those nice, deep, clean troughs, that's another key. And choosing the right bait at the right time is also key. Keeping that in mind, go out, spend a little time on these banks. I guarantee you're going to catch more fish. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, if I didn't cover anything or I didn't make anything specific enough, hit me up in the comments. I'll try to answer any of the questions that you guys have. With that, I'm going to go out and see if I can't catch a couple fish out here, and we'll see you on the river. Good luck.